Hi, I'm Metta Spencer, and I'm in Toronto, but I'm going to have a very important conversation because I get to be back in touch with a dear friend of mine, Jill Carr-Harris, who is in Kerala, India, in her home. She is a Canadian who has lived in India for 30 some years, is married to an Indian Gandhian leader, and has become very much a Gandhian leader herself. So just a year ago, she and her husband began this. Her husband Raja Gopal just left from Delhi, from Gandhi's tomb, to lead a march all the way for a year to Geneva, where there was to be a big peace event. And they expected lots and lots of people to march with them and mostly walk the whole way, but they were going to have to take a car in Pakistan, I think. Anyway, they got part of the way there, and then, of course, COVID hit. So they have had to cancel the march and return to India, which is a big disappointment, I'm sure. But I was trying to follow their adventures along the way. It was kind of hard to keep track of them. But they did write a little bit about their adventures in Peace Magazine and online, etc. Now I get to get caught up. And she's a dear friend. So excuse us if we kind of get caught up as friends. Hello, dear Jill. How are you?
Hello. Namaste. Jai Jagat.
That's great. Good. Wonderful to see you, dear. All right. So you're back home and you've been home for several months, I take it, because of the pandemic. Why don't you give us a kind of a summary? I don't know how you can summarize 6 months of marching, but how did it go? Where all did you go and what was it like?
So thank you, Metta, for having me on, because I always love to keep in touch with my Canadian compatriots and friends, especially you. So what we did is we started on October 2nd, Gandhi's birthday in 2019 in New Delhi. And just prior to that time, India had a scuffle, a kind of a civil, some strikes with Pakistan. So the plan had been to walk to the Pakistan border and then to cross into Pakistan. And the border was shut and the embassies did not communicate anymore. So we had to quickly change our plan. So instead of 2 months in India and 2 months in Pakistan, we stayed 4 months walking through India, where we started in New Delhi and walked down to Gandhi's ashram in Varda, which is in central India. And we were 50 international people, and we walked 2,500 kilometers in 4 months. And it was an extraordinary experience walking from village to village, from town to town, city to city, all through the central heartland of India, talking about Jai Jagat and collecting money.
We have to explain what Jai Jagat is.
Okay, so Jai Jagat is a term. Jai Jagat means all for the planet and the planet for all. Victory for everybody in the world. This was a phrase that was coined by a Gandhian, Vinoba Bhave, a follower of Mahatma Gandhi. And it really means that we're all in the circle together. We're all included, no one left behind. All for the planet for all, we're all for each other. And Jai Jagat was, was seen as a way to link the Gandhian principles in India, the ideas of inclusion, the ideas of nonviolence, to take that from India to Geneva by way of a big march. And so, as I just mentioned, we started in New Delhi and walked for 4 months, all through central India, and ended up in Gandhi's ashram in Seva. It's called Sevagram, Gandhi's ashram in central India, where he used to live. And then from there, the 50 international people fanned out. Some went to Pakistan, some went to United Arab Emirates, some went to Iran. And then we all converged after a month in Armenia, where we walked through the Caucasus, the Southern Caucasus Mountains in Armenia for 1 month in the snow and in the high Caucasus Mountains.
I saw photos of you marching in the snow in the mountains, and I thought, oh my God, bless you, dear Jill Carr-Harris, but I'm sure glad I'm not with you.
So it was an incredible experience, because Armenia is an amazing country, a country that has suffered so much war and so much genocide.
You spent most of your time in Armenia, or give me again kind of an itinerary where you jumped from India to where? You skipped over Pakistan mostly, and where?
So there was 5 teams formed, and 1 team went to Pakistan.
And you were able to get in without any trouble?
Well, that's right, because it was mostly Nepalis and not Indians, because we're an international team. And 1 team went to the United Arab Emirates and spent a month there talking about the Jai Jagat, walking between Dubai and so on, Abu Dhabi. And 1 went to Iran for 3 weeks and went all over the country talking about Jai Jagat and peace and so on, which I want to tell you about. And then we all converged and walked for 1 month in Armenia on the way to Geneva, but the march was aborted in the middle of the month of March because of the COVID crisis. Mm-hmm. So we almost did 6 months, and we covered 6 countries, not all by walking, but certainly by traveling and spreading the word of Jai Jagat, spreading the word of peace. And we were effectively going to go on to Georgia and so on, but we were stopped. But you're not going, I would like to just complete the story by saying, in the month of September, the French and Swiss friends who had been with us on the march went back to France in the month of March and organized 150 people to march into Geneva in the month of September. So we actually completed our march this past week with 150 people in 6 marches from all parts of France and Switzerland converged in Geneva, as we would have done in the global march, and took to the United Nations the message that they had. So it was interesting. We actually were able to complete it in a funny way.
Well, I had not heard any of that. Yes, all of that is news to me. The last I knew, it was a small group of people struggling up and down the mountains in the snow. And I didn't know that any of you had gone elsewhere. But you were where did you personally go? You were all over India, and then you flew from India, or what, to where?
So I flew with the forward team to Armenia. So I didn't go to any of those other countries, because we started on the southern border, Iran border of Armenia, and had to walk 500 odd kilometers. So I led that team in Armenia, and then slowly the others converged with our march.
Where was Rajagopal?
He went to Iran. And he went with a senior delegation from India at the invitation of the Iran government. This is after Soleimani had been assassinated. And they did very little. They met the Swiss, who looks after the US communication in Iran. And they met the French ambassadors and a few people in the government. But most of the time they were with women's groups and civil society throughout the country, Mita, trying to understand what people were thinking, what kind of peace is going on there. And surprisingly, they found so many groups who were talking about peace. They went to the Peace Museum in Isfahan. They met loads of people who were deeply committed to peace. And of course, they realized their government is not necessarily where they're at. But it was an extraordinary experience, and built up a sort of a Jai Jagat interest in Iran to be part of something bigger. And of course, they're all very cut off from the rest of the world, so it's not easy. But we were delighted to really see so many women, so many communities. We even saw efforts of trying to create a Gandhian self-sustaining community. They like Gandhi in many places.
They, on their own, had sort of become Gandhian.
They had tried in some small ways. And I think what happens is, even where where you have this understanding of real politique at one level, you have to divorce yourself and really look at local people and local aspirations. Mm-hmm. And that's what they did, and created a very, very good climate towards peacemaking within the country. Wow. So I hope this will have its impact and effect.
Well, because how did the government react to your proposals? I mean, not only in Iran, but all of these countries. Well, you negotiated before going there. You had it all set up. Sure. You got permission and so on. Sure. What was that like? Did most countries welcome you, or were they suspicious of you? What was the general attitude, and how did it
welcoming?
Another
incredibly welcoming. I mean, Pakistan for the international team was so welcoming. They had
the government itself,
politicians, journalists. What's that?
The government was welcoming?
No, the government was. I mean, the government was not. We had had some correspondence with the highest level of government there, and we were working through very senior, human rights organizations, civil society organizations. And so the government was perfectly aware of what we were doing. So there was no, in fact, we had a welcoming attitude to the people who went. So we were delighted. We were really delighted.
But I'm a little confused, because you were not allowed, originally, you weren't going to be allowed to walk through Pakistan. You were supposed to take vehicles and I don't know what the limits were, but that must have been imposed as a condition by the government. So they must not have been entirely welcoming to you.
No, they were.
Was it because you were coming from India that they?
No, Metta. The reason that we had to drive was for safety purposes, not because they weren't welcoming. They were quite welcoming, and I think Imran Khan wanted an opportunity to show he was open for peace. I'm not sure if you're aware, but they did for some time open a corridor for Sikhs to come from the Indian side to visit the Sikh temple, Sikh Gurdwara on the Pakistan side, which is a very historic Gurdwara. So there was some of that had already gone on. And we were really at the forefront of trying to build positive public relation. But finally, extraneous events happened and it was not possible for us to go. But we sent a team and they had a very good time and they were very welcomed. And they spread the word of Jai Jagat, which was the reason to go. So we felt,
yeah. What would that be like? You walk and you talk to people along the way. You have meetings, town meetings or something. Tell me, your average day activity. Was it the same in all these countries or did it vary from one place or one time to another?
Absolutely varied. I mean, in India, of course, we had hundreds and thousands of people we talked with. This was a huge outpouring. We had the state government of Madhya Pradesh, the chief minister organized our program in the central state in India. And one of our meetings was with 25,000 youth that had been bussed in from all areas. So we had huge meetings. And we had also some small meetings, but we had continuous, every day, 3 to 4 meetings. We were fed. The police looked after us, looked after our security. So India was phenomenal. And the international people could not believe that the government was so welcoming. So India was like that.
Now, for example, when you got fed, who fed you?
The local communities. The local communities. Where we didn't have local support or local communities, sometimes we had to buy grain and they would cook it. But for the most part, we were fed and looked after. We didn't spend hardly any money for 4 months with 50 people on room and board because we stayed in schools offered by the government and we were fed by the local communities. And we raised money on the way, which actually helped to pay for our international tour. And, to watch that disabled girl come out on the road and put 10 rupees in our pot, we saw so many situations like that. Yeah. So India provided us and people were completely supportive. There was no opposition to us ever, anywhere for 4 months in India.
In India.
Yeah. And so when we went to the other countries, it was much more just to spread Jai Jagat. It was less about walking. It was not doing the same kind of thing. It was more for shorter 3 weeks, 4 weeks time to acquaint the populations with the campaign and to spread our peace force, if you will, across 4 countries. So Pakistan, UAE, Iran, and we also went to Nepal. So we had these 4 countries.
Oh, you did go to Nepal. Okay. Now, there must have been language issues. How did you handle all that?
We had local hosts who helped us with all the language issues. So in the UAE, we had a lot of the Indians and South Asians who work in the Middle East, and the embassy people and the various Indian associations were very helpful. In Pakistan, it was more the civil society. In Nepal, it was the civil society. And in Iran, it was very much a tour agency that helps to bring artists and handicraft people together, women's group at the grassroots level. So each of them were different. In Armenia, we had a full team working for 6 months, creating the trek for us. So it was hugely organized. they creating the place, because we walked for 500 kilometers in Armenia. So that was all organized by a local host team. And we stayed in schools every night, and we were fed often by the local community.
Mhm.
So
Now, what happened in terms of transporting your equipment and so on? Did you have a truck coming along behind with your
exactly.
food and did you have a toilet? I have funny imaginations of how difficult things might have become.
Yeah. No, the outdoors was our toilet, so it was real camping, and the bus, of course, took the luggage from place to place, so we didn't have to have everything on our back. And
Mhm.
everybody walked, and it was amazing to see Indians negotiating snow and ice. I mean, this was first time, and wearing big boots instead of sandals. So it was amazing. When we did cook, we often had rice and dal, so we did have a bit of Indian food, which we bought locally. And yeah, otherwise we were given food by local people. It was an extraordinary experience.
Now,
And
you would get together, and you've already arranged for the town council or somebody to meet you for a get together of some kind, some
right,
kind of powwow. So now, what would happen there? Would you give talks? You wanted to
sure,
spread the word, but you also wanted to listen to them, right? And their
sure.
issues. Uh-huh. And were you trying to help them think about their own issues from a Gandhian perspective? And try to participate in a conflict resolution, or what was the give me an example of some of the difficult encounters you had that you had to deploy your own Gandhian resources for.
That's right. So, speaking about Armenia, the good side of it was that we stayed in a school every day. So, we had the children and the teachers of the schools as a first line of discussion. So, we did a lot of role play, songs, mini nonviolent trainings, asking them about Gandhi. They did lots of dances for us. They prepared many programs. So that was that. Now, as for the local population, whom we met in the towns and the villages and so on, it varied. Sometimes they talked about their own difficulties, and we took notes and listened and tried to understand. Sometimes they wanted to know more about Gandhi and nonviolence and the purpose of the Jai Jagat more deeply. So we would talk about that. In some cases, there were, a lot of military, because as you know, Armenia is currently at war with Azerbaijan. And we understood there was a huge military that lived in the mountains. And so we talked to them about the problems with Azerbaijan, with Turkey, and how they had gone through a nonviolent revolution in 2018, and whether that changed the way the governance was rolled out after the new government came into effect. And we found that it did, that there was a big change that had happened. But still, we understood the difficulties that Armenians had, both with Turkey on one side and Azerbaijan on the other, and how difficult it was for them to be between these two countries.
Well, I don't know whether you want to shift to talking about that, but of course that's given the fact that they're right now at war.
Yes,
I want to spend a bit of time talking about that conflict and the history of it and what you learned about the lives of the people who'd been
Yes.
affected.
Yes.
Maybe we can come back to that after
Let's do
let's
that.
focus on on
Yeah.
your various adventures and those of the other teams
Yes.
that went to where'd you say UAE?
UAE, Nepal, Pakistan, and Iran.
Ah, okay. Tell me about the Nepal situation. We have a friend of Project Save the World, Mukti Suvedi, who is in Pakistan. No, I mean in Kathmandu, Nepal, and we've been in touch. We've had a couple of interactions about, especially about. I gather COVID is quite difficult there now, as it is in India. Um,
Yes.
but what was the experience of the team that went to Nepal?
Well, the team that went to Nepal really focused on nonviolence leadership development at the grassroots. In other words, how you build a nonviolent leadership, because they went through an 8-year underground war, civil war. And of course, they brought it to peace. I mean, there's somewhat, and they're trying to cope with that. But the question is, how do you build peace at the community level? What is required? And those were the discussions which they talked about, and how important it is to activate a community leadership that is doing peace building work. Uh, because you can't just expect that it's the job of the government to keep peace. So these were the discussions that went on with the team in Nepal. And it was a fabulous experience for them. These were mainly, don't forget, some of our team, some of the 50 members of our team were from the grassroots in India. They were not, they've hardly ever been out of their villages, let alone traveling to Geneva.
But they
But
had been practicing Gandhian peace
exactly.
building in their own communities, so they were
So
well informed about it.
that's it.
Okay,
That's it.
did you encounter opposition? I know you said you didn't in India, but a lot of the leaders, political leaders in Nepal were communists, really, um,
Mhm.
and I presume still are. Uh, what kind of reaction did you get from people like that?
So they were very, on the whole, not a problem, because most of the people that went to Nepal were from South Asia. So, yeah, so they didn't see any difficulty with what they were saying, because Nepal is, clearly between China and India, and it has a very it's a great familiarity with Indians. So the bulk of the team were from India that went to Nepal. And so I think the discussions were rich, but I don't think there was any opposition
Hmm.
that I have heard about.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Anywhere? Did you get in other countries? Did you get heckled or anybody throw
No,
tomatoes at you?
no. I mean, I think in the UAE was challenging, because in the UAE, people really don't want to hear about Gandhi. The late king of Abu Dhabi, he built a Gandhi museum, and which is now, or a Gandhi exhibition in their museum, and was very interested. Of course, he's no more, but his wife is there, and the crown prince is there, and so they were welcoming. But I think generally, going for 3-4 weeks to that part of the world, having small marches, is just introductory. It takes a lot more work, but at least we were able to make a beginning, create networks, and I think that those were valuable steps. And we wanted to go somewhere, particularly coming from India. We wanted to go to somewhere that was Sunni, Islam and not just Shia of Iran. So we wanted to make sure we were crossing countries which were crossing different religions. So that was another reason for picking UAE. I think generally the ministry, there's a ministry in the Abu Dhabi government that is the Ministry of, I think they call it Ministry of, I don't know, diversity or something. So they're very much trying to be multicultural, and they appreciated the march. They did many receptions for our people, you know, to show their welcoming attitude.
Mhm.
So there was some good government response. Yeah.
Yeah, I should have asked you earlier the composition of your team. You say many of them were Indian and villagers. Were there many Western marchers?
Yes. 14 out of the 50 were Western.
Where were they from?
They were from Australia, Kenya, Argentina, you know. There was, for a short period, there was an American. He did not stay the full time. French, Swiss, so a number, Spanish. So there was various countries.
Uh-huh. And most of these people, except for the American, continued the whole way? Or did
They
some
continued the whole way.
briefly and then just...
No, they continued pretty much all but 3 continued the whole way.
Mm-hmm. Did anybody get sick?
No, not really.
Amazing.
I mean, people had small colds, they had some diarrhea, you know,
Well,
some things cropped
that's the
up
kind of thing you
like
expect when you go traveling. You're going to get it.
Yeah.
That's the reason I was asking about the toilets, you know.
We had 2 doctors with us, an Ayurvedic doctor as well as a Western doctor. So
Really?
there was always a medical specialist with us.
Okay, fine. So, okay, now you're in Armenia and you're marching along and meeting villagers or townspeople. Did you have to go long distances between towns? What if there was a long distance between 2 towns, too much to march in one day, what would you do? Sleep by the side of the road, or what did you do?
No, we walked roughly, if it was mountainous, 12 kilometers a day. If it was more flat, 20 kilometers a day. And they worked out the towns and the settlements pretty much according to that. So we could always find a settlement just off the road where we could stay in a school or a community hall. Mm-hmm. And if once or twice we were not able to quite make it, they would drive us forward. We would stay there and the next morning drive back to the point where we left and continue walking.
And okay. So now you're preaching the message of Jai
Jagat.
And what do you tell people? What are you trying to convey? And do they get it? Is it a message that you can actually convey in one meeting or one day with them? Did you ever stay over? Did you ever stay 2 or 3 days in one town? And
yes.
You did sometimes. And continue this dialogue of some kind.
Yes.
Okay.
We did. It was a town which had a lot of civil society groups and a lot of activity. We may have stayed 2 days. And basically, we tried to get across the message of nonviolence, that nonviolence is about coming together, working together, valuing relationships, interpersonal relationships, as well as we talked about violence with the earth. And this had a lot of resonance in places like Armenia because it's a very fragile ecosystem.
Mm.
And they're running short of water. And a lot of their topsoil is being lost due to mining and deforestation and overgrazing. And so we discussed a lot of these local issues with them. We had on our team, so we looked at 4 major areas. We looked at poverty, discrimination, climate crisis and environmental destruction, and violence and conflict. And we found we had people in our group that specialized in one of those areas. So they would make specific presentations if, in fact, the local population were interested in environment and climate change, then there would be a presentation and they would present and we'd have discussions. We had many, many discussions because it's a heavily mined country. And there's a huge environmental movement. And so there's a lot of conflict in Armenia between the mining interests and the environmentalists, a bit like parts of Canada. And there was a lot of discussion around depleting water resources. And we talked about, in terms of Gandhi and nonviolence, we talked about this notion of trusteeship, how local communities are trustees of the natural resources for the larger, country or larger society. And what did that mean? And I think there was a lot of generated ideas out of these discussions. We did several films. We had, when we spoke with the teachers, we asked them to write issues that were important to them, and we would talk to the students about them or ask the students. Each of the schools wrote notes and sent them on to Geneva. So we engaged them directly in our process in Geneva. So it was, you can imagine a little small rural school and suddenly a team of 50 people arrive who are there and available to talk about peace, which is of great interest to many of the local communities, as well as to talk about issues and to bring larger frameworks of analysis to their local issues so they could understand them in a broader way, but also share their concerns. So it was very rich conversation.
Did you try to form any kind of relationship that you would stay in touch with these people? Did you take a clipboard with their email addresses?
Oh, absolutely.
Are you building a global network for Jai Jagat, or it was just kind of a hello and goodbye, it's been nice meeting you kind of thing?
No, definitely. We took names and numbers, and the local host organization kept them all in their repository. So we didn't take all the small school headmasters' numbers with us from Armenia. We gave them to the central office in Yerevan, and they have it on their computers. But we can be in touch through them. So yes, absolutely.
Well, do you expect to do anything globally? Will there be follow-up interactions with all of these people? And I'd love to know more about that, because that's the kind of thing I think we really need globally. We need to get over borders and this trend toward nationality and local, make America great or make Russia great or make Armenia great, so it's I would love to know more about how you plan to use this network that you're building.
Well, when we came back, or at the end of, we actually stayed 2 months in Armenia after the march had closed. Not the 50 people all went home, but Rajgopal and I stayed on for 2 months to really work with the Armenian team on nonviolence. And we did a month of webinars, and we hooked in many of the people that we met. And we talked from the grassroots to basically the Prime Minister's office, to many of the legislators. And we did a month of very, very hard work on
Now,
looking
you were
at
in Yerevan for a month after.
yes,
after
two
the
months.
march.
2 months.
2 months. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And we did a month of webinar, which on the issue of nonviolent governance, and really tried to understand how things had changed.
Okay,
And-
let's focus on sort of the history of this, of the transitions that Armenia has gone through, the war they had, and how they had a new government elected a while back that was more promising. I'd like to, maybe let's focus. I'm not sufficiently up to date about what they have been through, and especially what is going on now with this war with Azerbaijan, and what maybe we can all do to try to, we being Canadians or other activists not living there, to support a ceasefire or some sort of resolution of the conflict.
Before I do that, I just wanted to say that after the ending of the march, we had 3 rounds of webinars, 3 different rounds. And the first was with the Armenians, so we'll come back to that. The second round in June, when we got back to India, was on the subject of nonviolent leadership. And it was linking a lot of our global friends on issues of nonviolent leadership and on various subjects which had been raised in the global family of Jai Jagat. So we did another month in June. And then in September, just last week, we did 9 days of webinars with on different subjects, with different countries, on different themes, again, globally, to re-network with people we had met and with people who had done various activities on Jai Jagat in their own environments, and we linked them. So the networking was done on 3 levels, 3 rounds. And it was also, we had this march into Geneva and a big final day on October 2nd to close this 1-year program. So we did that. And I think
where was that one meeting?
That was in Geneva.
Was it? Uh-huh. Did you go to Geneva?
We did not. We were there virtually.
Uh-huh.
So all of the webinars of these 3 rounds, their resolutions have gone to Geneva, and they're slowly going through everything, and they're creating a follow-up, because we're now extending the Jai Jagat from 2020 all the way to 2030. So the interest in the Jai Jagat has been created, and now we've got a decade-long program we're beginning to roll out. The first planning meeting of which will be in December. So this is what we were able to create over the course of a year. We've got a lot of people involved. We did complete this march. We did raise the goals of our march to the UN. We have the backing of the city of Geneva for doing some nonviolent economy work over the next 1 year. And we're beginning to plan forward for the decade, because what we realize, Metta, is that we're running out of time. You're one person who knows this better than most. We are running out of time, and the Jai Jagat cannot just say, right, fine, we've done everything. We realize we're just at the beginning and not at the end. And so we're rolling out many, many interesting programs and hope to take all that we've built this year and double it and quadruple it next year so that we can slowly build forward a large global movement. So that I
Wow,
just
that's wonderful. Now, look, can we get access? These webinars, what has happened to them? Did you record them?
They're all up on YouTube.
Is there any way that people can get access to them? I would love to
Absolutely.
watch some of these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll send you the URLs tomorrow and you will have access to them.
Well, you know, we started a page on our website, to savetheworld.ca, for Jai Jagat, but we lost touch with you, and nothing was going on for months at all. And I think we maybe just took it down because it was kind of embarrassing to have a page where there was nothing happening, although I knew you were someplace in the world doing a whole lot. So maybe we'll put it back up, and maybe there'll be a way of creating links there for people to go see your webinars.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's fabulous. Okay. Now, that is really good news to me. I'm much more encouraged by that than I was the idea that there were these lonely people struggling up mountainsides in the snow, and I thought, oh, but if something real is coming out of it in terms of a sustained relationship with people who are interested and engaged globally, perfect.
Yeah. Let's join forces. Absolutely.
Now, what did you learn about Armenians, and what's their problem with Azerbaijan?
Okay. So, as you know, Armenia is a very ancient civilization, and they have a high degree of, they have a sense of themselves as being often between very powerful countries or empires. So they've been there with the Persian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Soviet Union, and they've managed to survive in spite of all of this. So they
genocide.
In 1915, the Turks, Armenia was bigger, and what is now Turkey used to be Armenia, and about 1,800,000 to 1 million Armenians were killed in a very difficult circumstance, and the Turks will not acknowledge this. Mm-hmm. They will not acknowledge because they don't want to pay reparations, and they don't want to. This, of course, was under the Ottoman Empire, and so on. So they've suffered with this for a long time. Now, what is happening now is there is a disputed area called Nagorno-Karabakh. At the time of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, this area somehow got passed to Azerbaijan, but it was primarily ethnic Armenians living on that land. So although Azerbaijan technically by a UN resolution is supposed to access and have that land as part of their country, it's always been felt by the Armenians to be a very unfair deal that was made that left them out, even though their people lived there, that is ethnic Armenians.
Excuse me, you were in Nagorno-Karabakh.
We were not able to walk through Nagorno because it was a disputed area.
What is the general attitude of the Armenians living in Nagorno-Karabakh? Do they want?
So they are an independent country, but with the backing of Armenia. And
but not a sovereign country. They must be part of Azerbaijan, aren't they?
No, they are by UN resolution. They're part of Azerbaijan, but they have had a liberation struggle and created their own country, but it has not been recognized by many countries. Armenia has been there, has backed them up, but never but allowed them to have an independent governance.
Would they want to be part of Armenia if they had their druthers?
No, they just want to, well, they effectively are Armenians in a satellite state, and they are protected by Armenian government. I think they want their independence. And Azerbaijan has not acknowledged this, even though they had a horrible war in 93, 94, 30,000 people were killed on both sides. And after that, there was a negotiation that was supposed to take place under a committee under the OSCE Minsk group, whereby France, US, and Russia were co-chairs, and they were supposed to help Azerbaijan and Armenia work this out. This did not happen. So after a nonviolent revolution and the taking over of the Armenian government by Nikol Pashinyan, a great democratic leader who got rid of the corrupt the oligarchs.
When would this have been?
This was 2018, 2 years ago.
Right.
After that happened, he came with a white flag to the president of Azerbaijan, whose name is Aliyev, Ilham Aliyev, and said, let us now sit down and have peace discussion. And basically Aliyev said, we want Nagorno-Karabakh back. We're not going to discuss anything else. So there was no movement on these peace discussions. And as much as efforts were being made and they tried on, certainly from the Armenian side, we saw they tried very hard. And so Azerbaijan, with the backing of Turkey, who is expansionist in the area, as you know, Turkey has expanded into Syria, into Libya, wants to expand into the Eastern Mediterranean, which is beyond their sea waters, and so on. They said to Azerbaijan, we'll give you arms, you go ahead and start this offensive war. And so Azerbaijan,
who said that? Who was going to give it to them?
Erdogan and the Turkish government.
Okay, when did that happen?
About a week or two ago, it started. The actual war started on the 27th of September.
I think Canada has cut off any exports of war material of any kind to Turkey just in the last day or two. So there's certainly disapproval of Turkey's position. Yeah. I had read. Well, go on with your story, because I'm not clear in my own mind about some of the things that you had said. I was not aware that Nagorno-Karabakh has been in effect an independent country. It's in the press here. Things I've read treat it as part of Azerbaijan, or administratively under Azerbaijan's control. But you're saying that effectively it is an independent country, but more under Armenia's control?
Correct. The UN resolution, there are 4 UN resolutions, which put our Nagorno-Karabakh under Azerbaijan as a result of negotiations after the Cold War, the breakup and dissolution of the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. But when those tried to be implemented, the ethnic Armenians went to war with Azerbaijan, fought a war, they won and said, now we're going to set up our independent state. And nobody recognized this independent state except a few countries, including Armenia, who gave them backup for the past 20 years. So this is...
Okay, the reason I'm saying, I don't want to hammer on this because I believe every word you're saying. I just am surprised because I was reading a piece that was in The Economist, I think, where they have a map and they show Nagorno-Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan.
Under the UN resolution, that is correct. because no one acknowledged their self-determination, and they're setting up their own government after the 93-94 war. And but they're all ethnic Armenians. And Azerbaijan, how can they just have this country? It was only given to them by a declaration at the end of the dissolution of the Soviet Union that got passed in the UN, but never cohered with the local population's interest.
Okay, here we have the nub of the issue, isn't it? It's a separatist movement then.
It's a separatist movement.
Oh.
Absolutely.
All right, I didn't see it that way. I don't know what I thought it was. Okay. Well, all right, go on. Then my head is kind of clicking into different positions because I somehow had not understood that. Go on.
What we feel is very, very important is to stand against the expansionism of Turkey, which would like to set up a kind of pan-Islamic set of countries that it does not include the Arab countries. So as you may or may not know, Pakistan has backed Turkey and Azerbaijan. And they're seeking the backing of Malaysia and other non-Arabic Islamic states. And I think this does not bode well for world peace. You know, we clearly are not saying this because we're anti-Islam. We're saying this because this is a very difficult time of bringing parties together to fight a larger war that leads to the Turks expanding their territories. And so we feel that's one big problem. And second big problem, and Turks have been very uncharitable to the Armenians in just recognizing a genocide and then let's get on with, you know, building some friendship. This has been going on for 100 years. So the second problem is with Azerbaijan. This is run by, Ilham Aliyev, who is virtually an autocratic leader. He and his wife completely control the assets of this petroleum-based country, which feeds Europe with a certain amount of petroleum resources. And their autocratic style of governing is also not very helpful towards peace. I think it is very important for people to realize that this is, that unless there are sanctions put on Azeri oil, these people are going unchecked. They're buying, their country has bought so much military hardware from not only Turkey and Israel and I'm sure many other countries, that many of the attacks which they've done on Armenia are all drones and the most sophisticated equipment. So I think for these reasons, we should very seriously look at buoying up a leadership which simply has no locus standi to tell us as a separate country virtually that we are going to attack because you are our country. And the UN has to re-look at the history of those resolutions, the present and current situation, and try to come to some resolve resolution on how to move this forward. So these are some of the issues that, would be good for world peace.
All right. Now you asked me to try to contact people in the Canadian government. Obviously, I'm not well enough informed to be a very good person representing your point of view. Not that I oppose it. It's just I obviously didn't get it. There were things I didn't understand. Now I'm willing and eager to be helpful. I just need to understand more, I think. I guess tell me what you would, in your ideal world, what would I do that might be helpful?
So I'll put you in touch with an Armenian counterpart in Washington to get more up to date on what some of the Armenians are already discussing with the Canadian government. And then maybe you can see how to add or help or support that. Because I think it's important you get a solid connection. I'm only getting it from the constituency to whom we were engaged over this march, and I've been to Nagorno-Karabakh previously, and so I had some of my own experience, Metta, but I believe that I can put you in touch with an expert, and they will give you a little bit of a briefing, and then you can decide.
My problem is I'm not even sure what the goal is. I assumed the goal was kind of go back into your previous positions and do a ceasefire and
yes,
continue as before. But it sounds, if you're talking about a separatist movement wanting more independence or wanting to be recognized as an independent country, that's a more ambitious project on the part of the people in Nagorno-Karabakh, if not indeed from Armenia, than I had understood. It's not a matter of just stop the fighting, but change the whole structure. And that is a very much more ambitious project.
No, I don't agree that that's exactly, I mean, there is an element of truth, but what the Prime Minister of Armenia is saying now is let us sit down and find a compromise. Okay. And he sees it as three parties, not one party. The three parties would include the independent state and Armenia, Azerbaijan. And they're really anxious not to see so many lives lost and would like to see a ceasefire and would like to see negotiation.
Well, are you aware of any movement in Canada that actually was supporting this three-party negotiation idea as opposed to just a ceasefire?
I would imagine that anyone who's versed on the subject would understand that the three parties need to be there because the people on where the actual conflict is taking place need to weigh in on the conflict.
Well, it does seem to me that there's plenty of ambiguity or confusion. If I see maps in which Nagorno-Karabakh is portrayed as part of Azerbaijan, and they don't think they are, then some kind of clarification would seem to be in order, at least. And I don't know what that would amount to. But if there could be any kind of agreement on the status of the country, would that be kind of the goal, to try to get a consensus about what this piece of land is all about and who they belong to?
Well, there is a Minsk group. So under the European security regime called OSCE, there is a group that has formally been constituted as of 1994 that had they done their job, they would have moved this cart along. So immediately that group has to meet and negotiate, and not just allow a frozen conflict to occasionally flare up.
That
So,
sounds good. It
yeah.
sounds reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's should maybe that be the pitch? The question is, what is my ask? If I'm going to try to talk to somebody in Ottawa, what do I want them to do? And it sounds, I need to know more, but it also sounds as if maybe the real activation of this OSCE group would be a step at least in the right direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. People need to go back and negotiate.
Good. I'll do what I can. All right.
Bless.
Jagat, namaste, etc.
Jai Jagat. Jai Jagat.
Bye bye.
Yeah, all the best. Yeah, bye. Bye.